For years, many people believed one simple rule about the British monarchy: the king decides who controls royal power and royal property. But what if that wasn't always true? What if centuries-old laws quietly overruled even the king himself? Recently, royal insiders revealed something that stunned palace watchers. Lawyers representing Prince Edward confirmed that a legal inheritance connected to the royal system may not belong to King Charles after all. And if that claim is correct, it could reshape a quiet but powerful part of the monarchy. But the real question is this: how did this legal twist begin? Just a quick reminder of the hook. Lawyers confirmed that Prince Edward might legally inherit something King Charles had claimed. The revelation shook palace walls. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The story starts quietly, as many royal scandals do. At first glance, the monarchy looks simple: king, queen, heirs, ceremonial roles. But the reality is far more complex. Behind the glittering crowns and polished carriages lie centuries-old rules, secret agreements, and legal precedents that can quietly upend expectations. Few people realize this. Not all royal property or titles belong to the monarch personally. Some are bound by historical conditions that even the king cannot easily override. Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, had always lived under the radar compared to his older siblings. Most of the world knew him as the quiet, diligent royal who rarely made headlines. But insiders reveal a different side. Before fully committing to royal duties, Edward ran a successful television production company, proving he had both ambition and practical skills. Later, he shifted focus entirely to public service, overseeing youth programs, charity work, and representing the monarchy in low-profile but impactful ways. Few know that Queen Elizabeth personally trusted Edward with sensitive royal responsibilities during the later years of her reign. He was seen as someone reliable, diplomatic, and capable of carrying out projects without drawing unnecessary attention. That trust would later become a key part of why this inheritance question mattered so much. The twist begins with the Duchy of Edinburgh, a title linked to significant historical, charitable, and public duties. Many assumed it would pass automatically to Edward after Prince Philip's death. After all, Philip had always believed Edward was the royal most suited to carry on his legacy. But here's an unexpected fact. Even though Philip was Edward's father, the transfer of the duchy is not automatically guaranteed. Legal letters, patent, and centuries of precedent determine succession, sometimes overriding family expectations. Edward's legal team quietly began reviewing these documents. They discovered that long-standing promises and public expectations created something called a legitimate expectation under royal law. In other words, even the king might be bound by the weight of history and formal announcements made decades ago. Another surprising detail: such legal interpretations have rarely been tested publicly in the British monarchy, making this situation unusually delicate. At first, palace aides hoped the matter could be handled quietly. A simple private discussion would suffice, they believed. But the deeper Edward's lawyers dug, the more complicated the matter became. Letters from Queen Elizabeth, official announcements, and archival documents all hinted that Edward had a rightful claim. The problem: King Charles had assumed, like many, that his authority would control the outcome. The tension grew inside palace walls. Advisors debated, legal scholars weighed in, and whispers began circulating outside the royal gates. It was clear this was no ordinary administrative matter. Something about this inheritance, its legal, historical, and symbolic weight, made it different from past royal disputes. And just when everyone thought it was settled behind closed doors, a new question emerged. One that would push the monarchy into a rare confrontation between law, tradition, and royal expectation. But the true test was only beginning, and what happened next would leave the royal family grappling with a reality they had never faced before. Everything changed the moment the Duchy of Edinburgh's succession came under scrutiny. At first, it seemed like a simple ceremonial matter, just another title passing quietly to a family member. But the deeper the legal review went, the more it became clear: this was no ordinary transfer. Prince Edward had long been expected to inherit the title. In 1999, when he married Sophie Rhys-Jones, palace officials quietly signaled that he would one day become the Duke of Edinburgh. It was presented as a formal expectation, yet few realized the legal weight behind it. Royal letters patent, those formal documents issued by the monarch, dictate exactly how titles are passed. Once written, they can be incredibly difficult to change. Even the reigning king cannot simply ignore them without causing legal and constitutional complications. By the time Prince Philip passed away in 2021, the title temporarily returned to King Charles. That seemed normal at first. After all, titles often revert to the crown before being reassigned. But Edward's legal team had discovered something crucial. The original letters patent, combined with public announcements made decades earlier, suggested Edward had a legitimate expectation to inherit the duchy. Legal scholars call this a right backed by precedent, and in royal law, precedent can be as powerful as formal authority. The duchy itself is more than just a title. It represents decades of charitable work, military engagement, and youth programs. Prince Philip had spent over half a century shaping the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which has impacted millions of young people worldwide. Edward had devoted years to supporting this program, attending hundreds of award ceremonies across multiple countries. Observers noted that he was already carrying out the duties the title would require, making him the natural successor in the eyes of many insiders. As Edward's lawyers prepared their case, palace advisors debated fiercely. Some argued that King Charles should retain control of the title to streamline the monarchy, following his vision of a slimmer royal family. Others insisted that honoring decades of precedent would avoid a public dispute and preserve continuity. Rarely has a decision so symbolic also carried such complex legal weight. The public aspect of this expectation also mattered. Supporters of the Duke of Edinburgh Award saw Edward as the rightful heir. His connection to the program was deep, personal, and widely respected. Meanwhile, the king's authority over titles was unquestioned, but tradition and public commitment created a delicate tension. Even historians noted how unusual this moment was. While royal disputes over succession have happened before, it's rare for a legal interpretation of public expectation to challenge a reigning monarch's assumed authority. Few outsiders understood how close this situation came to sparking a constitutional debate, because the monarchy typically resolves issues quietly. And then came the revelation that shook the advisors the most. Edward's claim was not just symbolic, it had legal grounding strong enough to force action if challenged. Suddenly, what seemed like a simple title transfer had become a potential constitutional dilemma, with both precedent and law stacked against the king's initial assumption. The next steps would define not just the title's future, but the balance between tradition, law, and royal authority. What happened next would not only test Edward's patience but also challenge the monarchy itself. The moment Edward's legal claim came to light, the palace entered unfamiliar territory. Suddenly, what had seemed like a quiet behind-the-scenes issue became a story that threatened to reach the public eye. And in the monarchy, exposure can be dangerous. The British royal family has weathered scandals before, but most were about personal behavior. This one was different. It was about law, legacy, and authority. Prince Edward's claim was rooted in a centuries-old combination of letters patent, public expectation, and precedent. These legal instruments dictate the passing of titles, estates, and responsibilities. Few people realize that disputes over titles in the UK have, in rare cases, led to parliamentary debates. One example is the Act of Settlement in 1701, which fundamentally changed royal succession rules. While this wasn't a matter of the throne itself, the potential public scrutiny carried its own risks. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was intense. Advisors scrambled, trying to predict public response and media coverage. A small circle of royal aides debated whether to resolve the issue quietly or risk a more formal legal clarification. The tension wasn't just administrative, it was personal. King Charles, long accustomed to shaping the monarchy on his terms, faced an unexpected challenge. The law might override his assumed authority. And that alone unsettled many within the family. Media whispers began to spread. Royal commentators speculated about a behind-the-scenes battle over the Duchy of Edinburgh. Though nothing official had leaked, journalists sensed the story's gravity. Public trust was at stake. A lesser-known fact, the British press often uses hints from palace insiders to build pressure before formal announcements. In this case, subtle reports suggested that Edward's claim was stronger than many expected. The legal and public ramifications were complex. If Edward had to assert his claim formally, it could set a precedent for other royal titles. Could other family members contest assignments based on precedent and expectation? Historians quietly noted that disputes over inheritance have previously split European royal houses. In some cases, disagreements lasted decades, damaging family relationships permanently. But not everyone inside the monarchy saw Edward as a challenger. Many viewed him as the rightful successor, given his decades of involvement with the Duke of Edinburgh Award and his careful, loyal approach to royal duty. He had quietly attended hundreds of youth award ceremonies, promoted charity work across the UK, and maintained impeccable discretion. Another surprising fact: Sophie, Countess of Wessex, used her PR experience to help manage Edward's public image carefully, keeping attention positive despite the tension. Still, the palace couldn't ignore the possibility of a legal dispute. Advisors considered multiple scenarios: a quiet negotiation, a formal review of the letters patent, or, in the worst case, a public court challenge. Each option carried risks. Legal proceedings could reveal internal disagreements, while a quiet resolution could make the king appear to have ceded authority. Then came a revelation that intensified the drama. Edward's claim wasn't merely about status. It included rights tied to estates, income, and charitable oversight. This meant the fallout would affect not just tradition, but real-world operations. The monarchy had to act carefully, or risk a scandal that could echo across generations. And as advisors debated, one unsettling fact emerged: the decision, whatever it would be, could permanently alter perceptions of royal authority. Some family members quietly wondered if this would be the first time in recent history that a monarch had to yield to the law rather than tradition. But just as the palace began considering its next steps, a new complication appeared, something no one had anticipated. It wasn't just about law anymore. Public opinion was about to weigh in, and that would change everything. As the story of Prince Edward's legal claim spread, it was no longer just a private palace matter, it became a public conversation. The media, always hungry for royal intrigue, quickly picked up on the details. Newspapers ran headlines about a royal inheritance battle, while commentators debated whether the king's authority could be legally challenged. And the public? They were fascinated. Few realized just how closely Britons follow the minutiae of royal titles. Polls conducted over the past decade show that even minor disputes over ceremonial roles can capture widespread attention, with some surveys reporting over 60% of the public forming opinions on internal royal matters. Edward's reputation played a major role in shaping public sentiment. Unlike some members of the royal family, he has maintained a largely scandal-free public image. His decades of involvement with the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which helps millions of young people develop leadership and life skills, painted him as a hard-working, loyal, and responsible royal. A little-known fact: Edward has attended more than 400 award ceremonies worldwide, quietly continuing his father's legacy while avoiding tabloid drama. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, also contributed to this favorable perception, using her PR expertise to maintain a positive narrative around Edward's duties and public engagements. The public was divided. Some believed that tradition and fairness demanded Edward inherit the duchy. Others argued that King Charles, as the reigning monarch, should have the final say. In opinion polls, reactions ranged from admiration for Edward's quiet diligence to criticism of perceived rigidity in the royal system. Many commentators noted that this was a rare moment where legal precedent and public expectation were openly challenging royal discretion. Journalists and royal historians noted that disputes over titles have happened before. In the 18th century, arguments over dukedoms sometimes even required Parliament to intervene. Today, a similar tension surrounded the future of the Duchy of Edinburgh. While the title carries prestige, it also includes real responsibilities such as managing charities, estates, and financial oversight. Public debate quickly grew. Social media users and royal commentators analyzed every detail, praising Prince Edward's patience while others speculated about possible tension with the king. Reports suggested Edward's legal team might assert legitimate expectation, arguing that decades of public promises meant he had a rightful claim to the duchy. Inside the palace, discussions became tense. Advisors debated whether the king's authority should prevail or whether honoring long-standing expectations would preserve family unity. Private meetings, letters, and consultations revealed the stakes were not just about a title but about trust, legacy, and royal stability. Legal experts reviewed centuries-old documents known as letters patent. These records suggested Edward had a strong claim, especially because public announcements had long indicated he would inherit the role. After weeks of review and quiet negotiations, the palace reached a resolution. Prince Edward was confirmed as the new Duke of Edinburgh, gaining control of the duchy's estates and charitable programs. Public reaction was largely positive, with many praising his decades of quiet service. Yet the episode revealed something important. Even within the monarchy, law, tradition, and family expectations can collide in unexpected ways. The monarchy avoided public scandal, but the situation raised a lingering question. Could this precedent encourage other royals to assert claims in the future?